The morning sun cast long shadows across the crystal gardens of Valdris Prime, when the first screams echoed through the city's harmonic towers. Ambassador Kalen had been reviewing trade agreements in her crystalline office when the ground beneath her began to vibrate with an unnatural rhythm, not the gentle hum of her people's living architecture, but something darker, more predatory, through her transparent walls. She watched in horror as black shapes descended from the sky like a plague of locusts. The hive had arrived without warning, their bioships blotting out the twin suns as they disgorged wave after wave of chitinous monstrosities onto the peaceful world below. Each creature stood taller than the elegant crystal beings, their razor-sharp mandibles dripping with acid that could dissolve quantum steel in seconds. Kellen's people had known peace for over 3,000 years. Their weapons were ceremonial, their military nothing more than a historical curiosity. They were philosophers, artists, scientists, not warriors. As she watched her neighbors' crystalline forms shatter under the relentless assault, she realized with growing terror that her entire civilization was about to become extinct. The Valdris defense grid lasted exactly 14 minutes. Their energy shields, designed to deflect asteroids and cosmic radiation, proved useless against the hive's bioweapons. The creature's acid breath ate through protective barriers like water through paper, while their claws tore apart the elegant spires that had stood for millennia. "This can't be happening," Kalen whispered, her voice creating tiny harmonic ripples in the crystal floor. But it was happening, and with each passing second, more of her people were dying. The hive moved with terrifying efficiency, consuming everything in their path. They weren't just killing, they were harvesting, breaking down the crystalline lifeforms into component materials for their endless expansion. Now here's where things get interesting. And, trust me, you'll want to hear this part. While most galactic species would have simply accepted their fate or sent out polite diplomatic protests, Kalen did something different, something that would change the course of galactic history forever. With her city crumbling around her, and the screams of her people echoing through the quantum communicator, she made a decision that her refined, peaceful culture would normally consider barbaric. She called for help from the one species every civilized race avoided, the humans from Earth. "Emergency transmission to all frequencies," she gasped into the quantum communicator, her normally melodious voice fracturing with pure terror. The device sparked and smoked as hive acid began eating through the building's foundation. "This is Valdris Prime, Outer Rim Sector 7. We are under attack by hostile forces. Our defenses have fallen. We need help. Anyone who can hear this, please." The transmission cut to static as acid finally reached the communication array. But those desperate words had already begun racing across the galaxy at faster than light speeds. Most species would have received the message, debated it in committee for weeks, then sent their regrets, along with a sympathy card. But this message was heading toward a small blue world on the galaxy's edgier world that most civilized species whispered about in fearful tones. A planet so violent and dangerous that its inhabitants were classified as Deathworlders, Earth, within 3 hours and 17 minutes faster than any diplomatic response in galactic history. Every human settlement from the Luna mining colonies to the terraforming stations on Mars had received Kellen's plea, and something extraordinary happened. Something that would have amazed xenobiologists and terrified military strategists across the galaxy. Every single human who heard that transmission felt it like a physical blow to the chest. Not the words themselves, but something deeper, an ancient trigger buried in their DNA from millions of years of evolution on the deadliest planet in known space. You see, humans had developed something during their violent climb to the stars that other species couldn't understand: pack bonding. When one member of the pack called for help, every other member responded, regardless of distance, danger, or personal cost. Captain Jake Morrison felt it first aboard his cargo hauler Iron, currently hauling mining equipment through the Centauri trade route. The gruff, 53-year-old freighter captain had been planning his retirement, looking forward to quiet years on a peaceful colony world. He'd seen enough violence during the Outer Rim conflicts to last several lifetimes, but when he heard Kellen's desperate voice crackling through his ship's communication system, something primitive and powerful awakened in his chest. His weathered hands, scarred from decades of hard work, clenched into fists. His pale blue eyes, usually kind and tired, grew cold as Arctic ice. Morrison read the intercepted message once, then twice, his jaw tightening with each word. Around him, his crew of miners and traders experienced the same unsettling transformation. Their casual conversation died away. Their relaxed postures straightened, and their eyes took on a predatory gleam that would have sent chills down the spines of the galaxy's peaceful races. Lisa Park, his chief engineer, normally spent her time tinkering with engine components and humming old Earth songs. She was known throughout the trade routes for her gentle nature and infectious laugh. But as she processed Kellen's plea for help, her pleasant expression hardened into something that belonged on a battlefield, not in an engine room. "Captain," she whispered, her voice carrying an undertone of barely contained violence, "we need to go. Now." Morrison nodded grimly, already calculating jump coordinates to the Valdris system. But here's what made this moment truly remarkable. Same scene was playing out simultaneously across thousands of human vessels scattered throughout the galaxy. Freighter captains abandoned profitable cargo runs. Mining crews left billion-credit asteroid claims. Even elderly colonists demanded passage on the first ships heading toward Valdris Prime. The response wasn't coordinated by any government or military command. It was something far more dangerous, an entire species answering a call for help with the instinctive unity of a pack protecting one of their own. And the terrifying thing, the crystalline beings of Valdris weren't even human. They were complete strangers from a world humans had never visited. But they had asked for help, and that was enough. As Captain Morrison's iron will changed course toward the Valdris system, joining an impromptu armada of human vessels, one question burned in every human mind. Would they arrive in time to save anyone, or would they find only the shattered remains of another world consumed by the hive's endless hunger? The answer would reshape the galaxy forever. The emergency klaxons hadn't stopped wailing on Terra Station for 6 straight hours, and Admiral Tom Bradley's coffee had gone cold 3 times as he stood before the holographic displays that showed something unprecedented in galactic history. The grizzled military veteran had commanded fleets through the brutal Outer Rim conflicts, survived 3 major battles that military historians still studied, and watched good soldiers die in the darkness between stars. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for what he was witnessing now. Bradley's weathered face, marked by a jagged scar from plasma shrapnel at the Battle of Kepler's Edge, remained stoic as reports continued flooding in from across human space. His steel-gray eyes, which had seen the worst humanity could inflict on itself, now tracked something that defied every military doctrine ever written. "Sir," Commander Amy Rodriguez called out from her station, her normally steady voice tight with what could only be described as barely contained fury. Rodriguez had earned her rank through 15 years of exemplary service, known for her calm professionalism under pressure. But today, something primal burned in her dark eyes as she continued her report. "We're now tracking over 8,000 civilian vessels that have broken from their assigned routes within the last 4 hours. Miners abandoning billion-credit claims, traders dumping cargo worth entire planetary budgets, colonial transports changing course mid-journey. They're all heading for the same destination." Bradley nodded grimly. "The Valdris system, yes, sir. And the numbers keep climbing every minute. Now, here's where things get really interesting, and, trust me, you're going to want to hear this part, because it explains everything about what makes humans different from every other species in the galaxy." Dr. Michael Hayes, Earth's leading xenobiologist and probably the only human who could explain this phenomenon to the terrified alien delegates, stood before the emergency council chamber, the distinguished scientist, whose research had earned him 3 Nobel Prizes and a reputation as the galaxy's foremost expert on interspecies behavior, found himself trying to translate something that most civilized races simply couldn't comprehend. The council chamber buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from dozens of species watched the tactical displays in growing alarm. Holographic projections showed the massive exodus of human vessels like a river of light streaming toward the outer rim, and the aliens couldn't understand what they were seeing. Dr. Hayes, chittered the Zelthari Council representative, her crystalline antenna twitching with anxiety. Surely you can make them see reason. This response is completely disproportionate to the threat. The Valdris are not even part of your species' alliance structure. Hayes adjusted his glasses and looked at the alien delegates with the patience of a teacher explaining basic physics. 2 frightened children. But how do you explain instinct to species that had evolved on safe, comfortable worlds where the biggest threat was deciding what to have for lunch? You have to understand, Hayes began, his voice carrying the authority of decades spent studying the darker aspects of human nature. Humans evolved as pack hunters on a world that tried to kill us every single day for millions of years. Earth wasn't just dangerous, it was actively hostile to life. Volcanic eruptions, ice ages, predators that could crack our bones with a casual bite, diseases that could wipe out entire tribes in days. He gestured toward the tactical display showing the growing armada of human vessels. We survived because we developed something most species never needed: absolute loyalty to our pack. When someone we've accepted as part of our group calls for help, every single human feels it like a physical wound. It doesn't matter if we've never met them, doesn't matter if they're not even human. The room fell silent, except for the soft humming of the station's life support systems. Hayes continued, his voice growing more intense with each word. We don't just send soldiers when our pack is threatened. We send everyone. Grandmothers, teenagers, accountants, poets. It doesn't matter. The call has gone out, and every human in the galaxy is responding to something buried so deep in our DNA that we can't ignore it even if we wanted to. The Zelthari representative's antenna twitched faster, betraying her growing nervousness. But this is completely illogical. The Valdris are strangers to you, complete unknowns. Why would you risk your entire species for, because they asked? Admiral Bradley interrupted, his voice cutting through the chamber like a blade. The force of his words carried the weight of humanity's collective rage, built up over millions of years of fighting for survival on the deadliest world in known space. Because they're being slaughtered by monsters, and that's not happening on our watch. The silence that followed was deafening. Bradley's declaration hung in the air like a challenge thrown down before the universe itself. But while the politicians debated and the scientists tried to explain, something far more ominous was taking place in the darkness between stars. You see, the hive wasn't just some mindless swarm, it was an intelligence so alien, so utterly ruthless, that it had consumed 17 entire systems without encountering meaningful resistance. The Hive Queen, a creature of living nightmare that existed in the spaces between dimensions, felt the first stirrings of something she hadn't experienced in over 1,000 years of conquest. Unease. From her position aboard the massive bioship that served as the swarm's mobile command center, she monitored the strange energy signatures approaching the Valdris system. These new signals were unlike anything in her vast catalog of conquered species. The ships moved with purpose, their energy patterns aggressive and chaotic compared to the orderly formations of typical galactic fleets. More disturbing was their sheer number. What military force deployed 8,000 vessels for a single rescue operation? Her consciousness, distributed across millions of drone soldiers currently feeding on Valdris Prime, recoiled slightly from these approaching unknowns. The Queen had achieved perfection through consumption, absorbing the knowledge and abilities of every species her swarm devoured. She knew the tactical doctrines of the Altarian Empire, the defensive strategies of the Centauri Federation, the retreat patterns of a dozen other civilizations, but these energy signatures matched nothing. In our vast database of prey species, new contacts detected, her biocomputers reported, in their emotionless drone. Classification, unknown. Threat assessment, minimal. Estimated time to arrival, 14 standard hours. The Queen's many eyes focused on the tactical display showing the approaching human fleet. Such a large force suggested either desperation or confidence to traits that rarely coexisted in the same species. Her previous conquests had taught her that desperate civilizations threw everything they had at her swarm in panicked, uncoordinated attacks that accomplished nothing except hastening their own destruction. Confident civilizations, on the other hand, usually sent precise military strikes designed to minimize losses while achieving specific objectives. They were more dangerous, but ultimately predictable. These approaching vessels fit neither pattern, which should have been her first warning that she was about to encounter something completely outside her experience. But the Hive Queen had consumed worlds, devoured entire civilizations, and faced down the combined fleets of galactic empires. Whatever these unknown ships represented, they were still just prey approaching the web. Prey was prey, after all, and the Hive was eternal. She would learn, in the most violent way possible, just how wrong she was about that assumption. Because what was racing toward Valdris Prime wasn't just a rescue fleet. It was an entire species that had pact-bonded with the galaxy itself, and they were coming with the full fury of Earth's children unleashed. The countdown to humanity's arrival had begun, and the universe was about to witness something that would reshape the balance of power among the stars forever. The Hive had turned consumption into an art form over the course of 1,000 years, perfecting their techniques across 17 conquered star systems. Each soldier drone represented biological perfection, 3 meters of living nightmare that moved with terrifying grace across the shattered crystal gardens of Valdris Prime. Their chitinous armor gleamed with a constant sheen of acid secretions that could dissolve quantum steel in seconds, while mandibles sharp enough to shear through starship hulls clicked together in anticipation of their next meal. These creatures had never known defeat. Hell, they'd never even known serious resistance. Every species they'd encountered had either fled in terror or died screaming as the swarm consumed their worlds. Fear was an alien concept to beings that existed solely to devour and expand creatures that viewed entire civilizations as nothing more than particularly elaborate dinner arrangements. But today, their perfect record was about to end in the most violent way imaginable. The space around Valdris Prime erupted in brilliant flashes of light as Admiral Bradley's fleet tore through hyperspace like an avalanche of pure fury. The exit signatures alone were enough to register on sensors halfway across the system, not the clean, controlled translations typical of civilized navies, but something raw and aggressive that spoke of barely contained violence. Leading the charged were 3 ships that would have made military historians weep with joy: the TDF Retribution, Vengeance, and Unbreakable. These weren't the sleek, elegant vessels favored by other galactic powers, with their graceful curves and artistic flourishes. No, these were warships that looked like they'd been designed by someone who'd studied violence as a science and decided to make it into an art form. Built from the same philosophy that had carried humanity from stone tools to star drives. These ships embodied brutal efficiency over aesthetic beauty. Every surface was armored, every angle designed to deflect incoming fire, every weapon system positioned for maximum destructive potential. They looked primitive compared to the sophisticated vessels of races like the Altarians, but there was something terrifying about their blunt functionality, like comparing a surgeon's scalpel to a butcher's cleaver. All ships, weapons-free. Admiral Bradley's voice cut through the communication channels like a vibroblade through flesh. His words carried the accumulated rage of an entire species that had just witnessed innocent people being slaughtered for the crime of asking for help. They hurt innocent people. Show them what happens when you mess with Earth's friends. Now, here's where things get really interesting. And trust me, you're going to want to pay attention to this part, because it shows exactly why the rest of the galaxy had always whispered about humans in fearful tones. The first wave of hive drones swarmed toward the human fleet in their standard attack formation, a tactic that had worked flawlessly against dozens of other species. These biological nightmares moved through space like a living carpet of death, their acid-spewing biocannons already charging for what they expected would be another routine massacre. Instead, they flew directly into a wall of kinetic rounds, plasma bolts, and something far more dangerous: concentrated human rage. The human response wasn't the panicked, disorganized firing typical of species facing the hive for the first time. This was disciplined, coordinated violence delivered with the precision of a species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of warfare. Railguns spoke in thunder, launching tungsten slugs at significant fractions of light speed. Plasma cannons painted space in brilliant colors as they vaporized hive bioships in seconds. But what truly shocked the swarm was what happened when their acid breath finally broke through human hull plating. Instead of retreating or surrendering like every other species in their experience, the human crews did something completely insane. They charged forward, manning their weapons until their ships were literally melting around them. The bridge of the destroyer Unbreakable took a direct hit from hive acid spitters, eating through the armored hull like it was paper. Captain Robert Stone, a veteran of the Centauri Wars, felt the deck plates beginning to buckle beneath his feet as toxic fumes filled the air. Any reasonable commander would have ordered an immediate evacuation. Instead, Stone grabbed the tactical officer's station as the young lieutenant collapsed from acid burns and continued directing fire. "All batteries, concentrate on that cluster of bioships," he roared through the smoke, his uniform already beginning to smolder. "We're not backing down." The Unbreakable died fighting, her guns firing, until the moment her power core finally succumbed to the acid. But in those final seconds, she took 7 hive vessels with her. Behind the military fleet came something that made the Hive Queen's consciousness recoil in genuine confusion, an endless stream of civilian vessels that had somehow been converted into instruments of war. Mining ships bristling with improvised weapons, cargo haulers fitted with military-grade shields, even passenger liners mounting gun batteries where their luxury suites used to be. Leading this unlikely armada was Captain Jake Morrison's Iron Will, her cargo holds now packed with enough explosives to crack a small moon. The gruff freighter captain had spent the journey to Valdris Prime converting his peaceful hauler into something that would have made a weapons designer weep with envy. "Listen up, you civilian cowboys." Morrison's voice crackled across the channel as his makeshift fleet closed with the hive formation. "We didn't come all this way to be polite. These things want to eat our friends. So let's show them what happens when you pick on someone humanity cares about." The Iron Will led the charge of mining vessels like some kind of demented cavalry charge, industrial cutting lasers carving through hive bioships, while improvised railguns fired streams of mining charges into enemy formations. These weren't military weapons, they were tools of honest labor, turned into instruments of righteous vengeance. And somehow, impossibly, they were working. Morrison watched his targeting display as a massive hive biocruiser loomed ahead, its acid cannons charging for a shot that would vaporize his converted freighter. He could have veered off, could have tried to find cover behind one of the military vessels. Instead, he did something that would have gotten him court-martialed in any civilized navy. He aimed directly for the enemy ship's center mass and pushed his engines to maximum burn. "This is for Valdris," Morrison roared, as the Iron Will transformed into a kinetic missile traveling at a significant fraction of light speed. And this is for anyone who thinks they can hurt people under humanity's protection. The collision between the cargo hauler and the Hive biocruiser lit up space like a miniature star, both vessels disappearing in a ball of superheated plasma that took out 3 more enemy ships in the blast radius. Morrison and his crew of miners and traders died instantly, but their sacrifice opened a gap in the Hive formation that human warships immediately exploited. Watching this impossible display of suicidal courage from her command organism, the Hive Queen felt something she had never experienced in 1,000 years of perfect conquest: genuine uncertainty. Her biocomputers were providing data that simply didn't make sense according to everything she knew about prey species behavior. These creatures fought harder when wounded, became more dangerous when cornered, and showed complete disregard for their own survival when protecting others. It violated every principle of rational behavior that had allowed her to predict and counter the tactics of dozens of other civilizations. But the most disturbing realization was yet to come. As her consciousness processed the tactical data flowing in from the battle, the Queen began to understand something that chilled her alien intellect to its core. This wasn't desperation or panic driving the human response. This was how they always fought. That the implications of that revelation would haunt her for the brief remainder of her existence. Because what was approaching Valdris Prime wasn't just a rescue fleet, it was an entire species that had somehow weaponized love itself, turning their protective instincts into the most dangerous force the galaxy had ever seen, and they were just getting started. What erupted around Valdris Prime in the following hours wasn't just a battle. It was a masterclass in why civilized species across the galaxy had spent centuries whispering about Deathworlders in hushed, terrified tones. The universe was about to witness something that would fundamentally change how every intelligent race viewed the strange, violent creatures from the small blue world on the galaxy's edge. Commander David Chen's fighter squadron cut through the Hive swarm like a pack of angry wasps protecting their nest, their sleek interceptors weaving impossible patterns through the chaos of battle. Chen, a 28-year-old pilot from New Shanghai, who'd earned his wings fighting pirates in the Outer Rim, pushed his craft far beyond manufacturer specifications as he led his squadron in a desperate dance of death. Blue Leader, to all wings. Chun's voice crackled through the comm system as his fighter screamed past a massive Hive biocruiser, drawing its acid spitter fire away from a group of evacuation shuttles. Priority target is those civilian transports. Draw fire, keep them busy, and remember today, we're not just pilots, we're shepherds, protecting the flock. His squadron responded with the kind of precision that only came from months of training. Together, each pilot pushing their fighters beyond safe operational limits. They weren't trying to win a conventional engagement. They were buying time and creating space for something far more important than military victory. But here's where things get really interesting, and trust me, you're going to want to hear this because it shows exactly what makes humans different from every other species in the galaxy. When Chun's fighter took a direct hit from Hive bioplasma, shearing off half his port wing and sending his craft into an uncontrolled spin, he had maybe 15 seconds before his life support failed completely. Any rational pilot would have ejected, hoping to be picked up by rescue crews if he survived the landing on Valdris Prime's crystal surface. Instead, Commander David Chen did something that would have amazed military tacticians and horrified safety instructors. He aimed his dying fighter directly at the largest concentration of Hive drones and armed his ship's antimatter core for manual detonation. Control, this is Blue Leader. His voice came through the comm system with the calm professionalism that separated elite pilots from weekend warriors. Tell my family I did my job. Tell them I made it count. The explosion that followed lit up space like a miniature sun, vaporizing 50 Hive drones in a single brilliant flash and opening a corridor that allowed 3 evacuation shuttles packed with Crystal Bean refugees to escape to safety. Chen died instantly, but his sacrifice saved over 200 innocent lives. This same scene was playing out across the entire battle zone as human crews made split-second decisions that prioritized saving others over their own survival. It was a phenomenon that the Hive Queen's biocomputers couldn't process, a complete contradiction to every survival instinct that should have driven an intelligent species. Meanwhile, on the shattered surface of Valdris Prime, something even more extraordinary was taking place. Marine Colonel Rebecca Stone, a 42-year-old combat veteran who'd earned 3 Purple Hearts fighting in humanity's bloodiest conflicts, led her troops in what could only be described as a controlled charge through hell itself. Stone's Marines weren't your typical peacekeeping force sent to handle diplomatic crises. These were hardened soldiers who'd cut their teeth in the brutal ground campaigns of the Centauri Wars. Men and women who knew that sometimes the only way to save innocent lives was to walk directly into the teeth of enemy fire and keep walking until the job was done. Move, move, move. Stone bellowed through her helmet comm as her unit carved through chitinous horrors that stood twice their height and outweighed them by several hundred pounds. Her plasma rifle spoke in steady bursts, each shot precisely placed to exploit weak points in Hive drone armor that her tactical computer had identified in real time. We don't leave anyone behind. Not today, not ever. The Marines advanced through the crystal gardens like a force of nature, their movements coordinated with the kind of deadly precision that only came from absolute trust in each other. When Corporal James Wright's position was overrun by 3 Hive soldiers, his squad mates didn't retreat, they charged forward, using shaped charges and close combat weapons to carve through the enemy formation and extract their wounded comrade. Now here's what made this even more remarkable, and pay attention, because this is where the story gets really wild. Dr. Michael Hayes, monitoring the battle from his research vessel in high orbit, was documenting something that contradicted every established theory about combat psychology. His instruments were recording tactical data that shouldn't have been possible according to everything xenobiologists understood about species behavior under extreme stress. The humans weren't just fighting the Hive, they were adapting to enemy tactics in real time, learning from each engagement, and becoming more effective with every passing minute. It was like watching evolution in fast forward, as an entire species collectively figured out how to kill creatures that had never been successfully resisted before. When Sergeant Paul Martinez's squad ran, completely out of ammunition, while defending a group of crystal being children, they didn't retreat or surrender. Instead, they improvised explosive devices from mining equipment left behind by Valdris workers, turning industrial tools into weapons of war with the kind of creative desperation that only humans seemed capable of achieving. Doc says these acids have a 3-second charge cycle before firing. Martinez called out to his team as they rigged thermal charges around a damaged crystal spire. We timed this right. We can bring the whole structure down on top of them. The improvised demolition worked perfectly, crushing a dozen Hive drones under tons of crystal debris and buying precious time for civilian evacuations. But Martinez and his Marines didn't celebrate. They were already moving to their next objective, because there were more innocents to save and more monsters to kill. And then there was Private Jennifer Walsh, a 23-year-old from rural Montana who'd joined the Marines to see the galaxy and ended up in the middle of humanity's first encounter with the Hive, when her position was completely overrun by chitinous nightmares. When her rifle was empty and her squad was pinned down 100 meters away, Walsh made a decision that exemplified everything about human nature that terrified other species. She didn't run. She didn't hide. Instead, she drew her combat knife, a simple piece of carbon steel that represented 10,000 years of human weapon development, and held her ground against creatures that could have torn her apart without effort. "Come on, you ugly bastards," Walsh shouted as Hive drones closed in from 3 directions. "You want to hurt kids? You go through me first." She lasted exactly 97 seconds against impossible odds, her knife finding weak points in chitin armor with the kind of desperate skill that only came from knowing that innocent lives depended on every second she could buy. Walsh died fighting, but her sacrifice allowed an entire evacuation shuttle full of crystal being families to reach safety. The crystalline inhabitants of Valdris, watching this incredible display of selfless courage from their refugee centers, began to understand something profound about these strange beings from the Deathworld. Ambassador Kalen, monitoring the human response from a hidden shelter deep beneath the capital, felt her crystalline heart resonate with emotions she'd never experienced before. It wasn't just humanity's capacity for violence that made them terrifying, though. Their ability to turn anything into a weapon was genuinely frightening. It wasn't even their tactical adaptability, though watching them learn to fight the Hive in real time was like observing military genius in action. No, what truly set humans apart was their absolute willingness to die for complete strangers, to sacrifice everything they were and everything they could ever be for people they'd never met, from a world they'd never seen. It was a depth of selfless courage that existed nowhere else in the galaxy, a quality that transformed ordinary individuals into something approaching the divine. And as the battle raged on, as more human ships arrived by the hour to reinforce their beleaguered comrades, one terrible truth became clear to every observer. The Hive had finally encountered something they couldn't consume, couldn't understand, and couldn't defeat. They had met humanity's pack instinct unleashed, and the universe would never be the same. The retreat of the Hive Queen marked a moment that would be studied by military historians for the next 1,000 years, the first time in galactic history that the seemingly unstoppable swarm had been not just defeated, but completely routed. Her massive bioship, a living nightmare that had served as mobile headquarters for 17 successful planetary conquests, now limped away from Valdris Prime like a wounded animal fleeing from a predator it had never imagined could exist. The Queen's consciousness, distributed across millions of drones throughout the galaxy, recoiled from the data streaming back from the battle zone. Her perfect record of consumption had been shattered by creatures she couldn't understand, beings whose tactical responses violated every principle of rational behavior. She had developed over centuries of conquest as her bioship disappeared into the void between stars, carrying the terrifying news of humanity's intervention to the wider Hive consciousness. A single message pulsed through the swarm's collective mind: avoid the small blue world and its people at all costs. They protected everyone now, and their fury was beyond measure. But the real story wasn't the retreat of galactic terror. It was what happened in the aftermath, when the shooting stopped and humanity showed the galaxy something even more remarkable than their capacity for violence. Ambassador Kalen made her way through the crystal gardens of New Valdris, stepping carefully around the debris of what had been her world's most beautiful district just days before. The elegant spires that had stood for millennia lay shattered, their harmonic frequencies forever silenced by Hive acid and human weapons fire. But among the wreckage, something extraordinary was taking place. Human medics worked side by side with Valdris crystal healers, their species' biological differences meaning nothing in the face of shared purpose. She watched a young Marine corpsman named Tommy Rodriguez carefully tend to a crystal being child whose resonance patterns had been disrupted by trauma. His rough hands, surprisingly gentle as he applied healing frequencies with equipment he'd learned to use just hours before. "Easy there, little one," Rodriguez whispered in accented standard, his voice carrying the same protective tone he might have used with his own nephew back on Earth. "We're going to make sure you're okay. Nobody's going to hurt you anymore." The sight of this warrior healer, this man who had fought through hell to save her people, now dedicating himself to their recovery with the same intensity he'd shown in battle, finally broke something inside Kellen's crystalline heart. She found Admiral Bradley on the observation deck of his flagship, the Retribution, staring out at the human fleet scattered across the Valdris system. The grizzled military commander looked like he'd aged a decade in the past week, his weathered face marked by exhaustion and the weight of mourning for the brave souls they'd lost in the fighting. Tears of liquid crystal streamed down Kellen's translucent face as she approached him, her voice barely above a whisper when she finally spoke. "I don't understand," she said, her words creating tiny harmonic ripples in the ship's atmosphere. "Your people died for us, beings you'd never met, from a world you'd never seen, people whose names you didn't even know. Why would you sacrifice so much?" Bradley turned from the viewport, his steel-gray eyes reflecting a bone-deep weariness that came from a lifetime of making impossible decisions. But there was something else there too, a quiet pride in what his species had accomplished, mixed with grief for the price they'd paid to do it. "You want to know the truth?" he asked, gesturing toward the tactical display that showed the aftermath of their intervention. "Look at what's happening out there." Kalen followed his gaze to see cargo haulers that had been converted into floating hospitals, their holds now filled with medical equipment instead of trade goods. Mining vessels distributed construction supplies to help rebuild damaged crystal structures, their industrial equipment repurposed for healing instead of extraction. Civilian volunteers worked alongside military engineers to restore power grids and communication networks, treating the reconstruction of Valdris Prime like it was their own hometown that needed rebuilding. "Because you called for help," Bradley said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of an entire species' protective instincts. "Because that's what family does for each other, and as far as we're concerned, anyone who asks Earth for protection just became family. Now here's where the story gets really interesting, and trust me, you're going to want to hear this part because it shows how one desperate plea for help changed the entire balance of power in the galaxy." News of the Valdris intervention spread across civilized space like wildfire, carried by traders, diplomats, and refugees who had witnessed humanity's response firsthand. The species that had been whispered about in fearful tones for decades suddenly found themselves at the center of a completely different kind of conversation. The Altarian Trade Consortium, which had previously banned human vessels from their most profitable shipping routes, sent urgent diplomatic messages requesting immediate protection agreements. The Centauri Federation, whose politicians had spent years complaining about human aggression in council chambers, quietly approached Earth's ambassadors about mutual defense treaties. Even the proud warrior culture of the Mandrak Empire, who had always considered humans to be barely civilized barbarians, began sending representatives to Terra Station, with offers of military cooperation and shared intelligence on potential threats. Dr. Michael Hayes found himself in the unprecedented position of having to explain to the Galactic Council why every major civilization in known space was suddenly desperate to align themselves with the Deathworlders they had previously avoided. "It's quite simple, really," Hayes told the assembled delegates, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades studying interspecies behavior. "They've finally realized what humanity represents. We're not conquerors or predators, we're protectors. And in a galaxy full of species that evolved on safe, comfortable worlds, that makes us the most valuable allies anyone could possibly have." His final report to the Council contained a single recommendation that would reshape interstellar relations forever. "Humanity has pact-bonded with the entire galaxy. We strongly suggest you treat them accordingly." But perhaps the most significant change wasn't in how other species viewed humanity, was in how humanity began to see itself throughout human space. From the bustling colonies of Alpha Centauri to the mining stations of the Outer Rim, people began to understand that they had become something more than just another spacefaring civilization. They were guardians now, protectors of the innocent, the species that others called when the darkness between stars threatened to consume everything they held dear. The old name Deathworlders began to fade from common usage, replaced by something that better captured humanity's new role in galactic affairs. Trading posts that had once refused human visitors now displayed signs reading "Protected by Earth's Guardians." Shipping lanes that had been plagued by pirates for decades became safe passages under human patrol. Entire systems that had lived in fear of raiders and slavers suddenly found themselves under the protective umbrella of a species that considered their safety a personal responsibility, and in the deep void between stars, other predator species that had spent centuries eyeing the galaxy's peaceful races began to reconsider their expansion plans. The Krillian slavers canceled their planned raids on agricultural worlds. The Void Hunters retreated to the galactic edge, unwilling to test themselves against beings who had driven back the supposedly unstoppable Hive. Earth's children were listening now, monitoring communications across thousands of light years, and they had made their position crystal clear, threatened their friends, and faced the combined might of a species that had fought its way to the stars from the most dangerous world in known space. The transformation was complete. The age of Deathworlders, those feared beings from the violent blue world, was over. The age of protectors had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. The end.